The way to think about Resolve when you're looking at your workflow is you want to look at the node-based setup, and ideally you don't want to end up putting all of your color corrections on one node. The reason being is it's then very hard to turn off certain nodes or have particular control over certain corrections. So for example, if you do an exposure correction and a saturation correction, and then you'd have a window doing some secondaries, all on one node, it's very, very hard to just get rid of one or just take one away and see what it looks like without, or change one without destroying the other stuff that you've already done. So the best thing to do is work with nodes as if they were layers and do them individually. So the basis, again, and nodes are very powerful, and I'm not going to go into all of the ins and outs of nodes because there's a lot you can do with it. I'm just simply going to work with serial corrector nodes, and I'm going to right click, add node, add serial. That's how we're going to bring up a second node. But the first node we're going to go back to by double clicking, right clicking, change label, and then I'm going to type exposure. And this is going to be our first change that we're going to make. And all we're going to do is we're going to bring up our highlights so they just kiss the top of the scope. And we're going to bring down our shadows so they just hit the bottom of the scope. And already we're adding some contrast here, and we can just turn it off by pressing the number. Okay, already we're making some changes, so that's good. What we're also going to do is just pick up the midtones just a fraction by dragging up from the midtones. Now I prefer to use curves. That's just the way I've been used to working. So I'm working with my white, so my RGB curves are all in here, and then this is just the Luma curve by itself. You've then got your shadows, midtones, highlights, and offset. The offset obviously is correcting the whole image. So if we just reset, let's just reset the curves there. If I do it with the offset, I can do a similar thing. I can bring up the overall exposure of the image, and then I'll take the highlights and move them up, and then maybe take the blacks and move them down. And I've done a similar kind of thing. It's essentially the same principle as what I've just done with the curves. So you can choose to your preference whether you like to work with the colors over here in the color wheels, or you want to work with the curves. Just because we've done it, we'll leave it like it is for now. And that's our exposure change for the time being. You might have to come back to it. So we'll go to the next one, and we're going to change the label. Right click, change label, and we're going to call this saturation. Right click, or enter, sorry. Now we're going to do a saturation adjustment. So to do that, the way I do it, come down here, saturation, it's at 50 at the moment. I'm going to drag it and keep dragging it until I'm happy. Now obviously there's all the way at 100 is up here. That might just be too much, might just be about maybe there. And again, it's very much subjective. You might want to color it more, color it less, change things. I'm just not really showing you how to color an image, but the process of how you go about doing it, obviously yourself, to get your satisfying kind of image. So we've done some saturation, and yeah, we might want to do a bit more, but currently, again, as I say, we're scrubbing through the whole image, and it's looking pretty good. So there we go. Very happy with that thus far. And we're going to bring it back actually a little bit more so we can just see these highlights in the clouds again. So we're happy with that thus far, but what I want to do is add another node, which I'm going to use, and I'm going to right click, change label, and I'm going to call it dynamic range. And this is where we're going to start pulling our highlights, start moving our shadow details. So to do that, the best way that I've found to do it is change over to tab number 2 down in the bottom here, come across to shadows, and then maybe lift up your shadows. So what I'm looking at particularly here is kind of under the bridge, over in this bit, and in the trees, just kind of getting something where I'm happy. Obviously, you've got to bear in mind that raising the shadows will give a little bit of noise depending on whether what ISO you were shooting at. We tend to try and stay to an ISO of 100 so that we do have quite a lot of flexibility later on in the image. So you can see that's looking pretty good. And we just need to move it back to fit. So there we go. So that's looking pretty good. Brought the shadows up a tiny bit. And then I'm going to do the same with the highlights over here. And I'm going to start bringing them down. So we're going to recover a lot of those. You can see that there they go. They're all gone and they're coming back. Perfect. So we've brought back a lot of highlight information there. Good. So now we've really stretched the dynamic range of this image. And I'm just going to show you by bypassing all of the nodes by using this button here. That's where we started. That's where we've come back to, but now we've added contrast and saturation, and we've got the dynamic range back that we need. But you'll notice the scope here has changed a little bit since we've added this dynamic range curve, or node rather. So we're going to go back to our exposure, and we're going to further adjust it. And actually this time I'm going to just do a little curve adjustment. So use my curves, make sure nothing's clipping, and There we go. We've got a starting to get a very nice looking image. I'm going to just give it a bit more saturation. Incidentally, if you've run out of saturation, if you've got to the point where you've got to the 100 on the slider of the saturation, you can't go any further. Obviously, the great thing about working with nodes, very much like layers, if you've been used to working with layers in, say, Photoshop, you simply add another node there, and you see how what's happened is it's sort of joined its position in the queue. You simply change that to saturation. It's a brand new node. You can whack saturation up again, and you can just keep going. Obviously, we're not going to go that far, so we're just going to delete that node and bring back to where we were. And again, as I say, this is nice and easy now because we can turn off that dynamic range, we can turn off the saturation, we can turn off the exposure all one by one, rather than having to simply turn everything off, turn everything back on, and then having no control over these individual things. And what did I do on that saturation? What did I do on that exposure level? You've got everything there. So now we're starting to get an image that we're, all in all, we're pretty happy with, and we could still, we could go still further with this. We could do a lot more in the sky. And actually, one thing that we can do is go here. You can change the color, temperature balance. So make it a little colder if we want, make it a little warmer. Personally, I think this image sits around sort of somewhere there maybe. And change the tint, more purple and sort of pink, magenta, or bring it more towards the greens. I'm just going to leave that for now. Mid-tone detail, very good at just giving us a little bit of clarity to the image. And what you'll notice if I drag it all the way to the left, everything goes soft. Drag it all the way to the right, everything becomes kind of over sharp. So it's essentially, if you're again used to Photoshop or Lightroom, it's your clarity slider. So we're going to just find a level where we think it's sort of nice. And again, it's very much to taste, but I do tend to like things quite sharp, and crisp looking, and that's just nice. So very happy with how this image is starting. And again, as I say, we could do much more in the sky. We could select the sky, we could select the lake, we could make individual color selections, and I'm just going to show you how to do that very quickly by using the qualifier button over here. You simply get your qualifier button. We're going to add another node, and we're going to call this. We're going to call this green grass. So we're going to make a selection for the greens. We're just simply going to take our qualifier dropper, make sure we're on the right node, and we're going to drag through the greens. And what you'll notice is this will go grey other than the areas that we've selected. And if you select this little magic wand, you can then turn off kind of the overlay, and you can actually see what colors you've selected. And then likewise, if we want to add some more colors, so maybe we haven't got all the colors that we want, you can start very much playing with the options down here and say, right, which bits do I actually want to select? You can change the saturation levels and say, right, we want a bit more green, a bit less of the green. We want luma wise, we want to move that down maybe a bit so we get some more green in then in the shadows, move them up in the highlight greens. And now we've got a lot of the greens. We can blur it, we can do so much. And I can't go into it now because it just takes too long to really go into it, but we've made a selection of our greens. And let's say now we want to make sure that all these greens are actually a little more green. So we're just going to simply, we've now selected them. These are the things that we're going to be affecting when we start dragging. So we're going to make them a little bit more green by oversaturating them. And you can notice that it's just the greens that are changing color here. So we've made a good selection, and we're going to make them nice and green. And actually we want to make sure they're really green. So we're going to drag them to the really green on the offset. And as you can see, we've made them very green. So if you want to do that, it's very powerful. And again, you can go further still by adding a window to this node and selecting, so you've got linear, circle, polygon, curve, and gradient. And these ones are already attached to the node, if you will. So you can delete them or you can add new ones. But the best thing to do is go to your window, and you'll see that what's happened is we're only looking at the selection now within that particular window. And you can keyframe this window, you can have it come in, go out, and if people want to see that, please give me a like, give me some comments, and I'll go into a little bit more advanced using Windows in Resolve and how certainly I go about using Windows. But so for example, if let's say you just wanted the grass over here to be super green, then you just do that and away we go. And you can actually then use the tracker to track this particular window in this particular place. So very powerful. And bear in mind, we're doing all this with raw footage. We're editing right away with raw footage very powerfully. So if you're going to edit your aerial footage and you're really just doing aerial stuff, even if you've shot some other stuff from the ground, why not do it all in Resolve? There's absolutely no reason why you can't just go ahead, do everything in Resolve. Anyway, what we're going to do is just get rid of this last node because we don't actually need it. We're quite happy with how the image looks, and we've done all of our other clips. You'll notice there's a little color window now saying that this one's been done, the others have not. But you would work through your clips, grading them all as you go. And we're happy with this one, and we've done them all now, pretending. Let's go ahead and get the clips ready for export. So I'm just going to save by Command S or Control S on a PC.